What is going on, ladies and gents? Robert Sykes, KetoSavage.com, and welcome to yet again another A.M.A. Ask Me Anything episode. Today, we're going to dive deep into, once you have your macros established, how do you formulate a meal plan and structure your meal frequency to best optimize for those planned macros. So, without further ado, let's dive into that, but let's first jump into the intro. All right, so today's question is brought to us by Victor, and he asks, how do you construct a diet/meal plan when you have your caloric intake and macros in place? I am all for simplicity, so for example, I take a keto brick and a ribeye steak as a starting point and then titrate fat calories to round it out, e.g. X grams of butter to get to 3,500 calories, or what other starting point do you have? I don't want to eat 2 sticks of butter with my ribeye, neither do I have a desire to eat 2 ribeyes for dinner. Is it protein to round out with fat or fat to round out with protein? Of course, depends on macros, but what is your starting point? So I get this question a lot, honestly. I get asked, how do you establish your macros, which is a topic for a whole other video entirely. But once you have your macros, how do you go about formulating a well-formulated ketogenic diet to hit those macros and kind of get the most bang for your buck in hitting those macros? So first off, you want to kind of figure out with your lifestyle what's going to be the best for you meal frequency-wise. Do you want to do like an A.M.A approach? I don't typically recommend A.M.A unless you're trying to do a cut and your calories are pretty low. If you're in a building phase and you have higher caloric intake, it's probably going to benefit you to spread that caloric intake a bunch more, beyond more than just one meal a day, if that makes sense. So I typically do 2 meals a day in which I'm also having a fatty coffee in the morning. So I wake up and I have my fatty coffee a couple hours after waking. I train first thing in the morning, and then I have my first actual solid meal within 1 or 2 hours of that training session, and then I have my second and final meal in the evening hours, usually about 2 or 3 hours before I go to bed. That's what works best for me. The beauty of the ketogenic diet is that you're not a slave to meal frequency. You don't have to eat every 2 or 3 hours like a lot of people do on traditional bro dieting protocols. So you can kind of structure your meal frequency around what your goals are and what is best for your day-to-day schedule. Everybody's got a different day-to-day schedule. Don't let your food be a limiting factor there. Figure out what works best for you individually and then optimize your meal frequency around that. Once you know kind of how many meals you're going to have a day, you can kind of partition those macros between those meals to get the most bang for your buck. Ideally, I recommend having a pretty equal distribution of your macros between the meals, especially if you're only eating like 2 or 3 times a day. And then I honestly try and recommend, like, my fat ratio is always higher than my protein ratio, so I typically always have more fat macros to work with than protein. That said, I don't ever recommend having a meal in that situation, my protein is significantly higher than my fat, for a couple different reasons. If your protein is significantly higher than your fat in a given meal, it's going to elicit a little bit more of a blood glucose and insulin response than it would if you had a pretty good solid portion of dietary fat mixed in there with it. And also, if you're only eating 2 or 3 times a day, it's better to have a slower disbursement of that protein throughout your body, which is going to be slowed down if you're pairing it with a good solid fat source. If you're slamming just a whey protein shake with no fat source, that's going to have a spiking effect on your blood glucose, blood insulin, and then it's not really going to take that long to be absorbed and assimilated by the body. I personally like to eat whole food sources of protein instead of a supplemental, shake or something like that, and then I try and pair that with a solid amount of fat. Typically, my fat grams meet or exceed my protein grams with any given meal, and then I can kind of equally partition that macronutrient between my meals, and then it just kind of covers my bases, hedges my bets, so to speak, and makes sure that I'm getting a good solid source of nutrients all throughout the day. So rather than sit here and talking about how I would do this, let's just jump into my macros. My Macros Plus is the macro tracking app I personally use, and I'll show you exactly how I would do this for me based off of his caloric goal of 3,500 calories. I don't know what his goals are. I don't know what he's trying to do. I'm just trying to make a basic 75-25% ketogenic ratio based off of his 3,500 calories. So let's jump into the computer and do just that. All right, we are jumping into My Macros Plus, which is the macro tracking app I use. I'm going to go over here to create a new goal, And we'll just make one up for Victor here. And we'll do it by ratio because I don't know what specific ratio he's wanting, but he did mention that he has 3,500 calories to work with. So let's just dive right in. Based off of 3,500 caloric intake, and we'll just do a typical ketogenic ratio of 20% protein, 5% carbs, and 75% fat. Again, there's a lot of nuance here, but we're just going to do it, based off of simplicity for illustrative purposes. So save that, apply it to the goal for the day. All right, we have 175 grams of protein, 43.8 grams of carbs, 291.7 grams of fat. So I never have that many dietary carbs, but if we're just going to do a typical, 5% ratio, that's what we're going to do. So track now. All right, so I'm going to assume that he is going to also do a fatty coffee in the morning and 2 large meals similar to myself. So let's just go through here. We'll add some. These are my customs and favorite foods, which I'm using on a pretty regular basis here. So what can we add to this morning coffee? We'll add some MCT oil. We'll put a tablespoon of that in the A.M. drink. We'll put some heavy cream, heavy whipping cream. He's got quite a few calories. Let's put 8 tablespoons. You could break this up into 2 coffees too if you wanted to. And then let's also put some butter. We'll just do like a standard ketogenic coffee, and I'm using that Alfresco brand butter. We'll put 2 tablespoons of that in there. All right, so that's the morning drink, 697 calories, 3.2 grams of carbs from the heavy whipping cream, and 76 grams of fat. Now, we've got 2 big meals to work with. So what I would recommend doing is I like to do, like an 85-15 patty or 96-4 beef is just a pretty fatty beef. 55-45, like you see there on the very top, is super fatty, so I wouldn't necessarily go that route. But like a 75-25 ground beef is a good place to start. So let's just throw in 8 ounces for the first meal. Save that. All right, that's 660 calories there. Let's just say you thawed out a whole pound of it. And we'll go ahead and we'll add the remaining 8 ounces of that pound to meal 2. All right. So boom, we got 2 meals, meal 1 and meal 2. And if you look up here on the very top, it shows how many macros we have left. We have 103 grams of protein, 115 grams of fat, and 40 grams of carbs right there in the middle. So we have quite a few more calories to work with. Let's start adding to it. So now we got our base laid down with the good quality ground beef. And that's 75-25. I get that from U.S. Wellness Meat, and it's super, super solid stuff. So we got quite a bit of calories to work with, quite a bit of carbs. Let's just do a whole avocado. We'll put that in meal 1 because he likes avocado. Let's say he wants to cook with some butter. He wants to cook that butter or that ground beef with some butter. We'll do 2 tablespoons of that. Let's say that he also... let's say he wants some asparagus with that meal. And let's say he also wants some eggs. We'll put some eggs in there. We'll do 4 eggs. All right, so definitely chipping away at our macros. That first meal is 1,371 calories, and the fat exceeds the protein, so we checked off all the rules there. We got still quite a ways to go, so let's move on to meal 2 and start adding stuff there. So I like to get some beef bone broth in. I don't want to do that packet stuff though. I have some bone broth in here somewhere. Actually, let's do some beef liver. Let's just give him some super nutrient dense beef liver. Plus there's a lot of protein in that. So we'll just do 2 ounces of that in meal 2. Save that. And let's see, he wants some broccoli as well. Let's give him like 150 grams of broccoli. That seems like a reasonable amount. So we got 53 more grams of protein, 11 more grams of carbs, and 53 more grams of fat. All right. Well, let's see here. He's got some cravings for a keto brick because he is the man and he knows something good when he sees it, and he loves keto brick. So I know I've got keto brick saved in here somewhere. Peanut butter keto brick. Let's just give him a half a keto brick to start. All right, half a keto brick, so that definitely ate up some fat grams. We got 37 more grams of protein. How about some... I'm a big fan of sardines. I feel like sardines are really good. So let's see if we got sardines in here. I know I've got those saved. Sardines, that's the Wild Caught or Wild Planet brand. And those come in 3-ounce cans usually. So we'll put that in there. Now we're over on fat by 5 grams. We still have 5 grams of carbs, and we got 22 grams of protein to work with. So at this point, it just kind of gets a little bit more tricky because you have to kind of mix and match a few more things to see what lines up. So let's see here. What can we do that's pretty lean? How about a salmon patty? You know, one patty. I get those from U.S. Wellness Meats too. They're super tasty. All right, so now we're over a little bit. So we're over 15 grams on fat. If I had that, I would probably take out that MCT oil from the coffee because that gets us much closer. And honestly, with the 5.6 grams of carbs, I probably wouldn't try and hit that. Like, I would make that the upper threshold. But just for the sake of nailing things in, what else could we do that's higher on the carbs? Let's just say he wants a full 200 grams of broccoli. What does that do for us? All right, that's closer for sure. We are, actually, let's do this. Let's do 250 grams of broccoli. And I did not script this out in advance. I'm just kind of doing this on the fly, as you see. And now we're over by 6.5 on the protein. So this is why I love eggs. Eggs are super easy to manipulate, and they're pretty, I mean, one egg is usually 6 grams of protein, so let's just bump that down to 3. And now we're super close on everything there. We have another 3 grams of fat to work with. What would I do with 3 grams of fat? We could do ghee. We could put a little ghee in his coffee. So I don't normally do a full tablespoon, though. I'll do like 0.333. That's a quarter teaspoon or something like that, isn't it? Yeah, so there we go. We're within 0.5 of protein, within 0.3 of carbs, and within 1.2 of fat. As long as you're within 5 grams, I'd say you're pretty solid. So for morning breakfast, we have 8 tablespoons of heavy cream, 2 tablespoons of butter. For meal 1, we have 8 ounces of 75-25 ground beef, a whole avocado, 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 cup of asparagus, 3 eggs. And for meal 2, we have the remaining 8 ounces of that 1 pound of ground beef. We have 2 ounces of beef liver, 250 grams of broccoli, half a keto brick, a can of sardines, 1 salmon patty, and 0.3 tablespoons of ghee to cook it all in. We're still hitting that, protein is not exceeding fat with every meal. So in meal 1, it's 60 grams of protein for every 106 grams of fat. So good to go there. And for meal 2, 115 grams of protein for every 124 grams of fat. So good to go there. First meal is 1,300 calories. Second meal is 1,700 calories. So a pretty good equal distribution there. And then if you were to zoom in on this summation, we pretty much hit, I don't know why my Macros Plus, I think MyFitnessPal does this too, but it has a strange caloric calculation. I mean, we're pretty much on the numbers, and it's still showing higher than 3,500 calories. So I don't know why it does that. But we hit our fat, carb, and protein goals, and we're right at that 75% ratio, 20% ratio, and 5% ratio. So everything is on the money, which is exactly what we want, and that hopefully illustrates exactly how I go about, finding the foods to hit the macros throughout the day-to-day basis. So I hope that illustrates kind of how I go about. That's pretty much what I do for myself. That's what I do for my clients. Once I have the macros established, if I'm working with a client, for instance, they tell me what their schedule's like. Every time I work with a client, I have them give me a breakdown of their 24-hour day. Like, what time are you waking up? What time are you training? What time are you eating? What time is your work schedule? That way I can kind of figure out what meal frequency and meal structure is going to work best for their personal, individual day-to-day. Like, you don't have to hit a certain number of meals. Like, what works best for you? Once you know how many meals you're going to consume, and once you know kind of when your training's at, when things are going to be allocated, then you can start breaking down the meal frequency and then partitioning those macros into the given meals that you have to work with. So some good high-level points there are try and make it so that your protein does not have a crazy excessive amounts over any dietary fat in a given meal. Again, kind of depends on your macros, but general rule of thumb, if you're following a ketogenic diet, you're probably going to have a higher ratio of dietary fats than protein. Like, you're probably going to have more fat grams to work with than protein grams. So kind of having an equal distribution of that fat grams between your meals is good. Having an equal distribution of those protein grams between your meals is good. And just kind of having fun with it. Like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that every single day. Like, if you're eating 3,500 calories every single day and every single day you're eating something different, going out to eat, constantly having to recalculate, it gets exhausting. But what I like to do, if I have a specific goal in mind, I know what my macros are to reach that goal, I'll meal prep for the week at that given caloric intake and macronutrient breakdown. And then the following week, as my macros and calories change, I just meal prep differently according to how my cravings have shifted. So that is what I would do with regard to planning your food and your meals around your macros. Hopefully that illustrated the point and illustrated how I go about it, and maybe you can take that and run with it. Thank you very much for the question, Victor. You've got some cookies and cream keto bricks headed your way. Just to reiterate the point here, if you submit a question in the link below and we use that question on this A.M.A series, then you get some free keto bricks. Thank y'all for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.